Okay, so let's install ArcShell. So I am in my home directory, home TST. Now the thing you do not want to do is put ArcShell, don't do this. Don't do make directory ArcShell and put ArcShell there. That's not what you want to do. That is a reserved directory for what's going to be called your user home. ArcShell will create that directory when you install it. You'll see that it gets created, and that's going to act as our user home. I don't want to explain that right now. Just trust me, you don't want to use that as your root installation for ArcShell. Also, I'm not installing this as root user. I don't recommend you do that. You usually want to install it as into a user account or into a privileged user account, such as Oracle or WebLogic or what have you, for running some application, maybe PSoft, for example, if you're running PeopleSoft. Okay, so I've got the tar.gz file in my home directory. We're going to go ahead and make a directory called app. It could be anything you want. It doesn't have to be in your home directory. You can do this wherever you want. And I'm going to move the tar.gz file to the app directory. And we'll cd to app, and we see that that's there. We're going to gunzip it. And then I'm going to tar -xf. I think that's it. And you'll see we have a new directory. We're going to go ahead and rename that directory. We're just going to move it to ArcShell. Now, again, it could be anything you want. ArcShell makes the most sense. And now we're going to cd to the ArcShell directory. And you can see we're in home tst app ArcShell. And we're ready to run the installation. And we do that just by running setup, ArcShell setup. Now, if you run into problems here, they're usually fairly easy to fix, and it's very possible you're going to run into problems. Those problems will likely be that some program, some basic program like BC or is not being used, or you've set some alias and ArcShell is choking on your alias. It's trying to run a known command, but you've modified that command somehow. Now we do disable the aliases for RM and CP because people often make those interactive, and that will obviously break a program that needs to run things automatically. So once we're going to do that during the install, but also if you source ArcShell into your environment, those aliases for CP and RM automatically removed. Something to be aware of. So let's go ahead and run setup, and you should see something like that. It's not real verbose, but there is some logging taking place in the background. So if I need to get those logs from you, I can. I'll show you. I'll tell you where they are if I need them. So let's go ahead and just wait for this to install. The installation really doesn't do much. It runs some setup programs, does some basic configuration. Everything is happening within this directory. The only files that now exist outside of this directory are in your home directory, and one is called .arc.exe.shell, and one is your .arcshell file. Okay, I guess you have a couple more. You have an arcshell.air file, and then there's that ArcShell directory that I told you ArcShell would create. So don't create that and try to put ArcShell there. That is actually your user directory for this node, and that does not get shipped around with ArcShell when you install it on other nodes. But what you need to know is what we put in the app directory there, that ArcShell directory, that is what we're going to package up and send to all of our other nodes. And we're going to replicate that directory structure across those other nodes, and anything we do in there will apply to those other nodes. But we'll get into that later. So you do have these directories in your, or these files and directories added to your home directory. So there is an uninstall script, but basically it's remove the initial directory, shut down the services, remove the directory we created in an app, and then remove this directory and these files, and you're all good. So once ArcShell is installed, we want to source ArcShell into our command environment. Of course, needless to say, I should have said you need to be in Bash or Corn Shell. It does work with Corn Shell also. If your default shell is not Bash, you want to make sure you type Bash first and go into a Bash shell and then run setup. So anyway, to source ArcShell in, we just source it into our command line by sourcing in that file. And that loads ArcShell into our environment. I know this now because I can type something like ssh_help, and I see some of the documentation for the SSH library. So I know we're working. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to start the ArcShell services. Now that it's sourced in, all the directories I need in my path are there. So I'm going to type which ArcShell.shell, and that is our ArcShell command line tool basically. So I can just type ArcShell.shell. Whoops, we need to no-hup this. No-hup ArcShell.shell daemon start, and we want to run that in the background. And then I can type log follow, and that's going to tail my application log file in the background. And we should start seeing basically the scheduler start running scheduled jobs. And we know that ArcShell is working. So I'm going to foreground that and cancel, and I'm going to go back to my home directory. And what we want to watch for is this file right here. You want to check this occasionally. There should not be any unexpected errors in that file. That would mean that the service daemon is errors are coming back. Now there are some errors that occur in there. For example, the utility that watches the file system it has a bunch of directory names. If those directories don't exist, it does throw an error, but those are expected. And that might, by the time you get this, actually that might not even, I might have that so that doesn't show up in there. But this is the file we want to watch for unusual errors. If we cd to our arclog.dir, notice this is in our home path, home test ArcShell log. So this is part of the stuff that only stays on this node. We're going to have these log files. So we have an out file. So if the service daemon, anything gets returned as standard out, it will automatically be put here. And then we have our regular log file. That's what we were seeing when we typed log follow. So it's just like tail log, but you don't have to remember the log file name or where it's at. You can just type log follow, and that ends. Okay, foreground that, Control C, so everything is running. So ArcShell is installed. This is how you install from a tar.gz file. If you need a .z file or some other format, let us know and we'll get that to you. So that is, ArcShell is now installed on this system, and it is up and running.